Welcome to the Alcohol-Free Lifestyle Podcast, where you learn to live a life of health, wealth, love, and happiness. Transformational executive coach John O'Connor, who is a 50-year-old man from Boulder, Colorado. He's been a friend of mine for, almost a decade now. John and I are in a business mastermind together. It's actually probably more true to say that it's a personal development mastermind filled with business owners.
Yeah.
John hasn't drunk alcohol now for many years. I think it might be 20 plus years. We'll ask him about that in just a moment. But John really is a specialist in coaching high performers, let's say executives or business owners who might be experiencing a crisis in their business, maybe a family crisis, and he's able to coach them through those crises with some emotional and sometimes mentally taxing techniques and support, and really helping his clients to stay creative and visionary when they're experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety. So if you're listening right now and you've ever experienced stress and anxiety in your life and the pressure of being a CEO or a business leader, an entrepreneur or an investor, then today's conversation is definitely going to be for you. John O'Connor, welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks, James. Looking forward to being here.
Tell us a little bit about, tell us a little bit about your story. You used to be a big, heavy drinker, and now you're not. And now you actually coach very successful people. So just share a little bit about your story.
Yeah, actually, the timing of this is really interesting because I stopped 24 years ago. I guess it would be Monday, it'd be 24 years, was the first moment that I actually, I think, consciously said, okay, like I have a problem and I need to stop. Like it was like a moment of resolve that came out of a pretty harrowing kind of like bar fight that I didn't start, that had nothing to do with me, but I was at the bar really late with a friend of mine, really drunk, and he thought he saw someone he knew from high school. He went up behind him and bear hugged him, and it turned out that it wasn't his friend from high school, it was some random stranger. And they just started beating him up, and I was just trying to drag him out of there, being like, all right, guys, sorry, we'll take him home. And they decided to fight me as well. And so I remember thinking to myself, like, why am I here? What am I doing? This is like, it had been a series of experiences where I'm in environments that are not safe. And that was one of those moments where it was like a life and death thing. I could have definitely, been seriously hurt or killed in that experience. And luckily I had been trained in fighting when I was younger. And so I was able to kind of defend myself and get away. But it was very scary. So the timing on this is really, really powerful. And the journey here, I mean, it's so dynamic. And so I wish there was like one moment where this whole thing emerged. But I would say on the coaching side, prior to coaching, I was a body worker. I was a massage therapist, and I got my massage therapy license when I was 21. And I studied shiatsu, which is, based in Chinese medicine, 5-element theory, and Swedish. But then I got trained in craniosacral work and deep tissue work. And for 17 years, 17,000 bodies, had my own business for 12 years, very successful practice in Manhattan. And what I would notice is that people would come in with all these issues, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, TMJ, stress, overwhelm, all these things. They get on the table and they would slow down, drop in, connect, and they'd come off like a different person. I've had people write albums on my table. Michael Stipe from REM wrote an album on my table. I've had, very, very incredible clients, just incredible experiences. And there was something about my work that would activate deep awareness and ahas and understandings. It would start to unlock new states of being for people, new awarenesses and understandings. But what I realized was that the body work, I was working more downstream from stuff that was being created upstream in terms of trauma, patterns of behavior, ways of thinking, identity issues, skill set issues. And as a massage therapist, they didn't come in for that work. They didn't come in to transform those things. They just wanted to get body work. And they would get a lot more kind of change through my work, but that wasn't what they were coming for originally. And so coaching just naturally evolved out of my work. I hadn't even thought about being a coach, never wanted to be a coach. I was starting a company with my wife where I was coaching people to share their life story on video in 2009. And my wife's like, why don't you get the coaching certification so that when you raise capital, people think you know what you're doing. even though I was really good at it already, because that's what I was doing. And when I got my certification, it just opened up a new conversation where I could start to work deeper with people in a way that would create long lasting change. And the body is the slowest vibration. It's the place where things begin to solidify. So when someone has long periods of stress, it starts to coalesce into the joints, into arthritis, into, they talk about stress being 80% of, the activator of disease. Right. And so, so the skill sets that I started to develop 15 years ago when I started coaching, now I do a lot of deep somatic work, a lot of deep parts work, IFS work. I do a lot of shadow work, really working with the unconscious. So when people come to me, they'll come with a specific crisis or an issue. And then once we get into that issue, we start to take a look at everything underneath that's informing that challenge. And then usually the way that I like to work is how do we have success without side effects? And usually when someone's really hyper-focused in their business world, there's all these side effects that are occurring in the peripheral, whether it's their health or their marriage or their children, or, there's a lot of things that people tend to create, kind of like alcohol, right? It's like we leave a wake of destruction. Some people leave a wake of destruction in the pursuit of success. And so, and it's interesting. People don't come to me for this, but what I've noticed recently, for the past several years, is that people get to a certain level in their 50s and they've hit the financial goal, whatever that is. Like, financial freedom was the driving force. Now they have it. And one of the last areas of change usually is drinking.
Is it really?
Yeah, they start to see their relationship with alcohol being the last thing that is keeping them from this kind of next level. Because alcohol tends to have this, like, again, downstream effect in terms of sleep, in terms of choices, in terms of, like, basically if you spend your time down regulating your nervous system and unwinding with alcohol, you don't develop the skills to manage your state. You don't develop the skills to manage your nervous system. So those skills atrophy. So you become less resourceful, less resilient, less capable of handling things. And alcohol starts to become more and more of the thing you use to cope, right? And so I've noticed that with some very successful people, alcohol has been front and center in a lot of their conversations. And I would say out of like my 30 clients, there's probably like 8 of them right now that have actively in 12 months or less of not drinking. And they're all 7, 8, 9-figure earners. They're all very successful. And alcohol is one of those things where, and they all say the same thing. Like, wow, I stopped thinking it would be a short-term thing. And then I just got so good. It's like, there's a part of me that doesn't want to let that go. And so it becomes like a positive feedback loop.
Yes.
And so, and look, it's really hard when someone doesn't have a problem. And it's one of these social things, but it's getting in the way, the headaches and the, it's not a problem per se. They don't abuse it, but even then that light use of it still has a negative impact. Yes. And those are the hardest people to stop alcohol, because it's like, well, I don't have a problem. Why should I stop? I actually like a glass of wine. I never tell people they have to stop. It's not, I never take people's inventory and tell them they should start. I think just change your relationship. Find a relationship that works, whatever that looks like.
Yes.
Clearly the relationship setup doesn't work right now, but maybe there's a new way to relate to it that does. And let's kind of explore what that is.
You referenced the lead singer of the band REM, Michael Stipe, coming in and doing some work on him, and he created some music as a result of that. Do you find that when people do work with you, and I'm not referring to the massage type work, which you did in a previous part of your career, but the work that you're doing now with executives and business owners, the creativity comes out of someone.
Always. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Usually because I am trained as a hypnotherapist as well. So a lot of the work that I do is, like, I had one guy who came from a very large hedge fund to a very small hedge fund. And his vision was to make it number 2 in the world. And I was like, well, how are you going to do that? Like, what's the plan? He's like, well, it's all up here. It's all in my head. And so part of that, our job was to work to help take that vision and make it more concrete, more tangible, to be able to to articulate it to other people to inspire and motivate them. And then also to help him to stay really laser focused on the core behaviors and the intentions that he was trying to achieve while there was chaos happening all around as he was trying to build this business, right? People get very distracted. And usually when they slow down, drop in and connect and there's a internal felt sense of what they need to do, not from their head, but there's an internal somatic sense of like, ooh, I know what I need to do. There's a different level of movement and drive and motivation that comes from that. And then usually in that conversation around, okay, great, that's the next step. So what's the realistic time frame to do that? Let's put a little date in there. Why don't you text me when it's done? So there's a little bit of accountability that happens. So there's the creativity. I call it the intention creation cycle. And typically what we'll do is when someone has an intention, and I'm trying to think, there was a client of mine recently that had set an intention, achieved the intention, right, which was huge. It was a ginormous multi-billion-dollar deal that he had set an intention to do. What we did was we just put him in like a hypnotic trance, just relaxing in, seeing this thing completed. But then going back to the first moment, it popped in his mind as an intention, as an idea of the thing he wanted to create. And what I like to do in the unconscious is you start to put those two moments aligned in the present moment. And it's kind of like more of an internal energetic process, but the intention to do it and its completion. And you just kind of hang out there with the two of them in your awareness. And what happens is your unconscious mind starts to build a narrative. When I set an intention, I make shit happen. Right? A lot of people can think that, but they don't feel that, right? Like a lot of people think certain things, but they don't feel a certain way. I know I could do it, but I don't feel confident. Right? So a lot of what we'll do is we'll wire in like intention creation. And what did I intend to do? And then as soon as it gets created, we wire it. So the unconscious mind goes, wow, when I set intentions, I make shit happen. It's a very powerful narrative. And especially when you do it and you have evidence of it, it becomes an identity. Who am I? I'm someone who makes stuff happen. When I set intention, it happens. And that belief system creates it. It's super powerful. And I always say, don't believe what I say. Let's experiment with it and see what occurs. And that's a lot of what I do too, is there's this weird phenomenon where people achieve a certain amount, but how they see themselves is still really young. It's like an older version of themselves. And you've probably experienced this, where you see someone really successful and then you get to know them and they're really insecure. Mm-hmm. Right. And they don't see themselves how you see them. They still see themselves in like an older version of their operating system or identity. So a lot of my job is to bring people into present time with where they're really at. Alcohol tends to stymie or stifle or freeze identity. And so the prevailing, I don't know if this is still the same, how I was trained when I was younger, is whatever age I started drinking was the age I stopped growing emotionally. So I stopped at 26. So I was 13 at 26 emotionally. And it took me several years to mature emotionally. And again, I know that maybe that's, I don't know how scientifically true that is, but I have found that to be the case, is that some people stunt their emotional growth when they start drinking. Especially people like us who have issues or had issues. Yeah.
The identity piece is really interesting. And if I may, I might self-indulge somewhat and just use myself as an example. And that is my organization, the organization that I have, which is called Alcohol Free Lifestyle, which is the name of this podcast. So we're recording on this now, has had recent explosive growth. Mm-hmm. We've had more prospects knocking on our door than ever before, more clients. We're really scaling the business and making generational positive impact in people's lives, which is amazing. And I'm noticing that I feel increasingly like I'm not the best leader I can be, because I've been used to running a business at a certain level, growing methodically, doing good work. And now all of a sudden it's growing very quickly, and I'm identifying I feel like I need a new set of skills because now I'm managing 24 staff and there's all these other things to do, and I'm stepping up, but I feel like it's going so fast that I'm not stepping up quickly enough. And so to talk to your point that you just referenced, I still feel like I'm the earlier version of me who's just hanging on sometimes, as opposed to this, let's call it glorified version of me where I'm like, I got this under control. Like I everything's cool, out of the way. I'll take care of it.
Well, so a couple of things. One is there is this prevailing narrative that I want to be the best version of myself. And if you've ever played golf and you try to swing your best, you slice, right? As soon as you try to hit it as hard as you can and the best you can, it requires effort. It requires the conscious mind to do. And I always find like it's better to just do what's required. And my old mentor used to say, just enough will always be enough. And when I was a kid, that used to be a dig, right? Oh, you just do just enough, and actually when you're running a business, just enough will always be enough, right? To be functional sometimes to me is the goal. Can I be functional? Can I create fluidity and functionality across my organization? Functional doesn't necessarily require you to be at your best, right? And so to me, like if something is functional and movement and flowing, and it's able to evolve in a natural way, that's fantastic. And of course, you can then develop into increasing your skills and ability. Like if I run a 5K and I eventually want to run a marathon or the Moab 250 or the Leadville 100, right? These are things that I can develop over time and get better. But, just the ability to run in general, right? Like we're getting into scales of like next level stuff, but I don't need to run 250 miles, right? That's great. But in order to be healthy, maybe I need to run, a couple miles a week to be healthy and functional, right? So that's the first thing, right? Like sometimes, like to be the best, it's like I want to be the best jiu-jitsu practitioner. Well, I can be the best with where my skill levels are at right now. Like I'm a purple belt, I'm not a black belt, right? So I can't force myself into black belt. That just takes time on the mat. That's going to take me a couple years from now to be a black belt. And I'm okay with that, but I'm really good on the mat. Like I can function, I can roll, I can have great rolls, I can have fun. That's the key. Can I have fun? Can I hang in there? And sometimes I'm getting a butt kicking, but my butt kickings are developmental, right? That's the key. Usually when I'm working with high level leaders, if we can have a frame around what you're doing in business as a dojo, it takes the shame out of making a mistake, not doing it well, not getting it all done, kind of feeling a little sloppy, doing it messily, whatever that is. That's okay, because this is my dojo development from white belt to black belt. So if I put a context that I'm on a journey from white to black, when you're doing something and you said you're just hanging on, that's okay. That's the developmental process. And then it's helpful sometimes to kind of step back and go, okay, I do this with jiu-jitsu. Where specifically do I need focused attention? Like in terms of a skill or an ability that I can maybe do 6 weeks of privates to like level that skill up. And so when I come back into sparring, like it could be like my guard retention or my guard passing or my mount control. Like if I really dial that in, my game actually levels up, because that's like a lot of time I spend in that area. So if you were to think in this, well, congratulations, by the way, the scaling of the business. I think there's so many factors to that. You guys are doing incredible work. You get results. People get results. They tell people about it. So you have this kind of word of mouth thing that's occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Concurrently, there's this macro kind of impact of people are struggling. I think people are unable to manage life, and alcohol has been the thing, and when I got sober 24 years ago, this wasn't available. Like no one, people used to really challenge my not drinking. And now it's become almost like inspiring. Like when I have clients who don't drink now, people are like, dude, how do you do that? How do you do that? What's that? I want to sleep better. I'm trying to like really get my, they're the biohackers, it's like, I'm successful and I want to live a long time, like my sleep is fantastic. Like people actually really enjoy the no alcohol conversation. Whereas before there was a lot of shame around it. There's a lot of like, dude, come on, man, just drink beer. It's like, we can't have a glass of wine. Come on, stop being a wuss. I used to get that a lot when I stopped. That was a lot of people just wouldn't talk about it because they were afraid of the peer pressure or the push from other
Mm-hmm.
people. But going back to, if you were to look at the business right now, what's one area that you feel like creates the most challenge for you in your skill, ability, how you show up? Is there like one specific area?
My perceived inability to inspire team members to the best of their ability, my perceived inability. So I think I'm inspiring in many ways, but not to the level where I'm observing that our team members are like really, really engaged. I might suggest that they're probably and I think I'm being overly critical, to be honest, because we have probably what I would suggest is an 8 out of 10 company culture. It's amazing. Like everyone loves working, or at least they tell me that they love working at Alcohol-Free Lifestyle. And people do great work most of the time. And then sometimes, thankfully, rarely, we do not so great work.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, I take responsibility for that. And I go, wow, how did I allow that to happen? How did I generate that? And one of our core values is I tell people, like, ultimately, I am responsible for your behaviors, even though you are responsible for your behaviors as well. So if you make a mistake, I'm the owner of the business. I'm the founder. It's my mistake. I'm ultimately responsible for that. So all of that is to say, I think as good as the company culture is, when it's not good or there's a mistake or something happens, I see it as I generated that. And that means I'm not the best leader I could be, and I'm not the most inspiring leader I could be, because if I was, then that mistake or that subpar performance wouldn't happen.
Right. You can see all the beliefs and assumptions you're making about that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, and does that serve you? Is that useful to have that approach?
Let's see. Is it useful to have that approach? It's useful in the sense that it makes me think about it and have a conversation with you about it. And now we're talking about it in a podcast conversation. So it's useful because now I can maybe challenge how useful it is or isn't. So it's useful in that sense. What do you think?
Well, because it sounds like for you, like we're assuming that how you relate to the team members is or isn't inspiring or motivating. Have you asked them?
Not specifically as it relates to their relationship with me. We have a good, we have feedback forms, and people always say they're having a wonderful time. We get on a monthly call and everyone praises one another, and it's a very supportive, collaborative environment. So I guess it's my observation. Yeah. But I haven't asked them specifically, do you find me an inspiring leader or an uninspiring leader?
Well, and it could be one of these things where, like, what's important to you about being an inspiring leader? Like, what does that give you to be an inspiring leader?
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's validating me in some way, giving me significance.
Right.
Maybe I'm seeking significance. Maybe I'm desiring to be known as an inspiring leader. And why am I desiring that, I guess?
It's a good question. There's that piece. So it opens up a bunch of like self-reflective stuff. Like, like, is this, what if you believe that you were an inspiring leader? Like, what would that be like if you knew that you were an inspiring leader?
Then I think my actions and behaviors would probably be inspiring.
Yeah, right. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I find sometimes like, we see behavior and then we make an assumption as to what the motive is, like why they did what they did. It's called an inference. And most of us have a high inference. This happens a lot. And this is where a lot of challenges come in with partnerships. I coach a lot of business partners where someone will do something, they unconsciously assume why they did it, and then they have a whole emotional reaction to it. And that wasn't the reason why they did it. And then it becomes this like ping pong of like inferences. And so one of the company culture things I did with a client, whereas they talked about generosity and all the different forms of generosity, but one of them was a generous inference, right? So like someone doesn't show up to a meeting, the first inference is like, what, you don't care? Like, I'm not important to you? Like, I don't matter, right? That could be like a high inference. A generous inference is like, dude, are you okay? Is everything all right? Like, did something happen? Like, my assumption is generous, and we always assume positive intent with partners, right? That's like and that actually in marriages is probably the best place to have that, is to assume positive intent with our partners. I find that I get into trouble when I assume negative intent on behavior. That happens a lot in intimate relationships, but it could be really interesting to check to say, hey, like, my assumption is like the way that I relate to you, like there's some inefficiencies in terms of helping you, inspiring you, working with you, empowering you to be your best self, to be a self that feels like, thriving and successful in your role. And I'd love to explore that with you. Is there a way that I can support you better? Am I supporting you? Is there an area where you would shift the way that I interact with you? And just get curious and just say, I'm curious if there is anything here. And if there isn't, then And then sometimes we get a little confused. Like, I had a client who was really complaining about their team making mistakes. But when we really did the audit of the team, out of their 8 producers, there was 1 person making mistakes. But the way that they unconsciously frame it was the team and not the individual. So the unconscious mind tends to generalize and distort information, right? And we delete information unconsciously, right? So we see something and then we generalize it. Oh, the team is messing up. The team is not producing. The team is having an issue. But it's actually an individual or 2 out of 8.
Got it.
I had a client of mine who made a really big error in shifting a marketing agency, and it's a very, very, very large organization. They have a lot of people that they control the marketing for. And out of their 13 companies, 1 got destroyed by this marketing change. But the way that he was talking about it, it sounded like every single one of the businesses got hit by this marketing shift. And the weight and the stress and the anxiety and the shame and the guilt and all this stuff. And when I really unpacked it, it was like one of the companies was hit the hardest. The second company was, maybe they had a 30% reduction and everybody else didn't even get touched by it. And so, and he wasn't even, and when we start to unpack it, he's like, wow, actually, no, it was this one company. And then we just got hyper focused on that one company and say, okay, how do we support them? And again, like, it's unconscious. We don't even realize it when we're in it.
So we're so clouded by story or emotion that we are not clear on what the actual issue or challenge is.
That's the biggest part. Is like, usually, what do you really want? Right? Because when we really get to it, people have like a surface example or thing what they want, but when we get onto it, they don't really know. They think this is what they want. And then when my job a lot of times is to really figure out what the real core issue is. What's the real issue that when that shifts, all of the little bubbles that we're complaining about dissolve. Like, a lot of people play whack-a-mole with problems. But if we find that one thing where all those problems are eliminated, like, that's what I'm usually trying to listen for. What's the deepest shift that then bubbles up and transforms everything above it? Usually it's an identity piece. Identity is usually one of the deepest shifts that one can make that then change what you value, what you believe, how you show up, your behaviors, your thinking, right? Like, from that identity shift, like, it all bubbles up, right?
What's an example of an identity shift? Someone has been believing that they are what identity, and then they shift to a different identity. Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges is people tend to confuse behavior with identity. So I'm shy. Yeah, I'm really unorganized. I'm unorganized. Like, I'm a mess. I'm all over the place. I am. These are all identities. I'm all over the place. Well, someone who's all over the place, how do they feel? Chaotic, frenetic, ungrounded. How do they behave? Like ADD, that's like it becomes an identity where, what does someone who is shy do? They sit in the corner. Like, shy person is not going to get up and introduce himself first. That's not what a shy person does, right? So an identity shift for someone who's shy is like, I like to sometimes use metaphors, It's just like, I mean, this can sound corny. I had one guy who said, yeah, I'm an astronaut. It's like, really? He's like, yeah, I go to places that nobody else goes. That's who I am. Like, I leave the ordinary world and I go to places that no one else has explored before. When he was thinking, he was like a serial entrepreneur, you know, he's like, man, I'm an astronaut, man. I strap my suit on, I get in my rocket and boom, and I go to places no one else goes. That's who I am. You know, so that like drove him looking in new places that no one else has gone in his business. Like, that was an identity piece.
And even if he's not an astronaut and he has no intention of being an astronaut,
it's a metaphor.
Yeah. There's a mutual friend of ours, Todd Herman, wrote a book called The Alter Ego Effect.
Yeah.
Was it the ego effect or the alter ego effect?
It's the alter ego. The alter ego effect. Yeah.
He talks a lot about that, right? I think that the musician Beyonce claims that she's quite shy naturally, but then before she goes out on stage, she steps into this fictitious character that she's created for herself called Mama Marmalade or something. And then Kobe Bryant, the great NBA player, the Black Mama and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's really useful in performance for athletes. It's incredible. You know, I think when it gets into day-to-day life and identity, I think we all have identities, and they shift in the unconscious. But to me, my work is all about coming back to self, and not living through an identity or an alter ego. It's like, can I live from myself, right? I have all these parts of me. We're all a multiplicity, right? I have a part of me that's, you know, scared. I have a part of me that's really confident and ballsy. You know, I have a part of me that loves being on stage. I have another part of me that just loves to be alone. You know, like, we have all these parts, you know, and, you know, in IFS work and parts work, a lot of what we try to do is get people back into self leadership. That place that is, to me, is like the spiritual place. It's like, it's the one consciousness. It's the witness inside of us, you know, and can I operate from self? I try not to operate through my alter egos. I try to operate from self. And there are times when, you know, I need to perform, and, you know, I might activate or connect to a part of me that's really, you know, ballsy. I might activate that part. But for me, it happens a little bit more in the unconscious. So yeah, he's incredible. I mean, his work is awesome. I think he's just a fucking rock star in
Todd Herman we're referring to. Yeah.
He's a rock star. He's like super smart. I learn a ton from him. You know, I find his work to be really inspiring. I think it's really useful. And I think there's a lot of like crossovers and stuff that I do, but I like coming back to self. To me, is, you know, when I'm with my son, I'm not in an alter ego. I'm trying to be present and really just, and connect from my deepest self. And that self piece, you know, where, you know, we talk about like the part of you that's connected to source, that has all your resources, you know, and to me, one of the greatest things that we can do as men and women too, but like, because a lot of the men's work that I'll do with guys is we take a look at developing your relationship to whatever you define as self. Like, some people think there is no self, and that's all great, but there is a felt sense of me, you know, a deep sense of like where there's courage and connectedness and clarity and compassion and groundedness, spaciousness. Like, to me, that's like all the definitions of like self.
I found recently that getting clear on what my values are has enabled me to make simpler choices and decisions. So, for example, my romantic relationship with my partner, Laura, is one of my highest values right now in this phase of life. I hope that it will always be, of course, but right now that is. And so just recently in the last week, there have been things that she and I had planned, but then work stuff has kind of been pulling me in different directions and pulling me away. And an earlier version of me would have let those distractions take over. But this version of me, now that I'm clear on my values, the actual choice, even though there was, potentially negative consequences from not focusing on an element of the business in that moment, the value of prioritizing that relationship and not compromising that relationship, and that being one of my highest values, actually made the choice to just value that so much simpler and easier. And there wasn't any guilt, there wasn't any shame, there wasn't any regret. It was just, this is the way it's going to play out. So that's just an example. That's, for me, has been very freeing to just get clear on the values.
Yeah. And also to eliminate the internal conflicts between values, right? So sometimes there's like in the hierarchy of values, there's a conflict because one is conflicting with another. So I really value my relationship, but I really value like the success of my business, and I have to make a decision, and they conflict, right? And so it sounds like unconsciously you're already adjusted. Hang on, my highest value is my relationship, the health of my connection, the rapport, the love. And then underneath that comes, and this is something when I stopped drinking, they said anything that I put in front of my not drinking, I'll lose. Like that was, if I value something greater than my sobriety, I will lose that thing. Right. So never put anything above my sobriety as a value. So it might be, so where that would play out is I'm on a boat with a bunch of billionaires and they're opening 1907 champagne, and I value the experience and the moment and the novelty and the connection and the relationship over my sobriety. I'll lose my sobriety. Like I will lose everything. When I put something ahead of my sobriety, I will lose whatever that is, because eventually with the alcohol, it'll just slowly dissolve. That was for me. So I never put anything above my value. Nothing ever comes higher than my sobriety, like with alcohol, like, because I know that first sip is the crack that starts to shatter over weeks and months and years. And then something happens and then boom, I'm back into like a, oh shit moment,
Yes.
So it sounds like once you're clear and it then kind of harnesses and harmonizes your behavior, your thinking, and then from that, who are you? Like, what's an identity that comes out of you prioritizing your relationship first? Like, how would you identify? Like, how would you describe someone? If you and I were looking at someone who identified their partnership first over their business, how would you label them, or what would you call them?
I like the word integrity. Like I'm an integrous person, or I'm the kind of guy that values his family over anything else.
Yeah. So you're a family man.
Yeah.
And that identity. Well, what does a family man do when it's 4:00 on a Friday night? Does he work until 2:00 in the morning? No. Like, what does a family man do? He makes dinner with his family. Like, I sit down and have dinner with my family. I'm a family man. That's important to me. I'm going to be present at dinner, like, because that's who I am. And then when we have that identity, it actually feels really good, right? So it becomes this like positive loop, right? And if we were to take the value piece and we apply it over you and the relationship between you and your team members, right? Like, what's really important, or what do you really value in that relationship? And right now, one of the things you were saying you value is being an inspiring leader, like being seen as an inspiring leader. That's important to you. But what else is important to you? From their perspective, like, what's important to you about them and their experience?
Of me?
Not even of you, but like, what's important to you in the relationship?
That they enjoy their work, that they want to inspire other people, that they feel like they have a beautiful work-life balance, that they're excited and energized and enthusiastic to do the work that we do, and they're able to also shut off from work and enjoy their own personal lives. And
yeah, beautiful. So what I'm hearing is you really value their health and well-being.
Yes.
In the interplay between work and life, right? Like, that's really important to you, that they have really healthy work-life balance and they feel a sense of satisfaction and inspiration in their work, right?
Yes.
And so coming from that value, this is where the hierarchy is. What's more important, being seen as an inspiring leader, or having them really be satisfied, happy, and having work-life balance, right? And look, not to say that it's not important. It's just maybe the hierarchy is different. What's more important is that they're happy versus you being seen as an inspiring leader.
So
right?
true. Yeah.
And if you were to come to the relationship with that value, how would it change how you interact with your team? Like, what would be different, or how would you
Yeah.
engage them?
Well, I probably wouldn't be trying so hard to have them feel like I was inspirational. I would probably just ensure that they had a healthy work-life balance and
The focus
support
would
them
be
in
on
that.
them, not
Correct.
you, right?
Yeah.
And that's huge, right? Like, that's the shift, is where when you realize with your team, it's about them, not you,
Yes.
right? Like, that you work for them, that they don't work for you. It's like a weird conscious shift. It's like, hang on, I want to help you succeed and thrive and find a sense of purpose in your role. That's huge. If you can develop a role for somebody where they can find their sense of self and express themselves and feel satisfied in their work, that's incredible. They win and you win, right?
And then them seeing me as an inspirational leader may be just a byproduct of me working for them, ensuring that they have work-life balance. So maybe I don't, or I surrender the goal of having them feel that I'm inspiring, and rather I just do everything I can to support them, and them thinking that I'm inspiring is a byproduct of that.
Exactly. Right. That's why, like, money is a byproduct of adding value. Like, money is a store of value. Most people try to make money instead of adding value, right? Like, money is the store of value. So if you just focus on adding value, money is the byproduct. Like, that's the thing that people get wrong is they just try to focus on making money, but you got to focus on adding value. When you do that, money's the byproduct.
Yeah, that's the shift that you were referring to. In fact, an earlier iteration of your business name was the shift, or guiding the shift. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. Patti Smith, a musician, actually named that my company because she had talked about, like, me helping guide her shift, and I was like, guide the shift. We should name my company that. She's like, yeah, it's a great company name, you know. And then eventually, like, I wound up buying my johno'connor.com URL, and so I just shifted it just to me, you know. And maybe I'll reignite that business name at some point.
Yeah,
we'll see.
I'm noticing there's some musicians there. Patti Smith is a pretty famous American singer, songwriter, and poet, isn't she?
Yeah. She when I was working on her, she had just published Just Kids, which is her story about her and Robert Mapplethorpe in the Chelsea Hotel. And it was before she got inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And she's an incredible woman. She's another inspiring, I worked with her for 7 years. Inspiring woman.
There's definitely a creative outlet that happens when people work with you, John, because there's also another person that you helped create your own album, right? Like with a fellow entrepreneur. You created like an album of sound effects or meditations or things like that. Do you recall?
Yeah. With Gabby Bernstein?
Yes.
Yeah. I scored her album. Yeah. That was a long time ago. It was 2010. I think this is right when she just launched on the scene. She's another prolific writer and spiritual leader. She's an incredible woman.
Maybe you should infiltrate the music industry, John. You should go and work with Justin Bieber to try and get some creativity out of him again.
Yeah, that boy's got some trauma he's got to work through.
Maybe Diddy has a little bit of trauma he's got to work through as well, possibly. Talking about current events. But John O'Connor, thank you so much for sharing
Fun jamming with you.
Yeah, it's been amazing. JohnO'Connor.com is the website where our listener can find you. And if you are a CEO or an executive or someone who considers yourself a high performer and you'd like to get guided on your shift, then certainly do go to JohnO'Connor.com and reach out to him and share with him that you heard him on the podcast, and maybe he can get some musical albums out of you, as he seems to get out of those who aren't even musicians, apparently.
It's interesting. For a long time, I thought creativity was painting and writing and singing. And, when I watch people launch companies, it is the creativity that's required to launch. Think about your business and the creativity that's been required to build your business, from Swannies all the way to, all the different businesses. The creativity is, it's like reframing our relationship to creativity. It's not art, being creative and manifesting something in the world. The creativity that we've got to deploy to have a healthy, dynamic relationship with our partners. But you got to get creative to be a father, to be a leader. Like, creativity is at the essence of all of it. And so I think it's helpful for people when they reframe creativity. I mean, Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act, is a really beautiful kind of like encompasses creativity as a whole in creating in life. Highly recommend that book, by the way.
John O'Connor, thank you
Thanks,
so
brother.
much for your time, sir.
Okay, my man.